Dust curled like smoke under the weight of his boots. The Texas sun hung low and red over the auction yard, casting long shadows between rusted rails and tired men. Luke Harper stepped through the gate, his silhouette carved from the sun. He moved with the kind of limp that told stories. Old ones. Stories of Bronx, of blood, of something once alive and now buried beneath the dust. The crowd barely noticed him at first. Just another old cowboy in a sea of denim and sweat. But some recognized the slant of his jaw, the way his eyes scanned horses like he was still judging champions. A few leaned into one another and whispered. He heard none of it. His world was quiet now. Quiet since the accident, since the fall, since the world he built decided he wasn't needed anymore. Luke tugged the brim of his hat lower, not to hide but to shield. The light hurt his eyes more than it used to. So did the stairs. His left leg dragged slightly. There was metal in there now. Steel rods where muscle used to be. That was the price of the arena. That, and the wife who packed her bags when the hospital bills grew too high and the laughter too rare. He didn't come here for company or memory. He came for a horse. A working one. Nothing fancy. Just something to help keep the ranch breathing. The Harper Ranch, once a name with weight, now barely kept the lights on. The fences were falling in, and the well was dry. One good horse might buy him another season. Next one's a real firecracker. The auctioneer's voice snapped over the loudspeaker, jarring Luke out his thoughts. Two handlers pulled at thick ropes as the black stallion thrashed out from the holding pen. He wasn't large, but he was powerful, lean like a coiled whip. His eyes blazed, not the startled look of a frightened animal, but a deliberate, dangerous challenge. The left side of his chest bore a deep scar, jagged and pink like the edge of a lightning bolt. Name's Diablo, the auctioneer said with a grin, and he's lived up to it. Broke one trainer's ribs last month. Kicked clean through a gate 2 weeks ago. The last fella tried to mount him. Well, he still walks with cane. The crowd laughed. Luke didn't. His gaze locked on the stallion. Diablo reared, teeth bared, and in that split second, the world narrowed. Luke knew that look. Rage born from pain. He had worn that same look in a hospital mirror once, pinned with rods and regret, wondering how something so strong could feel so broken. Opening bid, 500, the auctioneer said. Anyone feel lucky? No hands went up. Murmurs drifted. Luke didn't blink. His hand rose. 500. Do I hear 6? No one countered. Sold, the auctioneer said, stunned. To the limping legend in the back. Laughter, a ripple through the crowd. But Luke didn't move. He just stared at the horse. As they tried to lead Diablo out of the ring, something snapped, one of the ropes, maybe a rusted bolt. Diablo twisted violently and broke free, hooves flashing, screaming as only a horse can scream. Raw, thunderous, wild. People scattered. The handlers shouted. But Diablo charged straight for Luke. Time didn't slow. It sharpened. Luke didn't run. He stood his ground, eyes locked on the black fury barreling toward him. At the last second, Diablo struck, shoulder first, not teeth or hooves. Luke flew, hit the ground hard. The air knocked from his lungs. He rolled twice, dust coating his sweat-slick shirt, hat flying off into the chaos. Silence fell. He lay there, blinking at the sky. Pain burned up his side. He tasted blood. Someone nearby muttered, "Should have stayed retired." And then Luke laughed. Not loud, not manic, just a dry, bitter sound that cut through the still air. It came from deep inside, as if something long frozen had cracked. He propped himself up on one elbow. Diablo stood across the ring, chest heaving, flanks trembling, but not running. Watching. "You're a mean son of a bitch," Luke whispered, coughing. Someone helped him to his feet. Tanner, the auctioneer, an old friend with a gut like a feed barrel and eyes that never miss much. What the hell was that? Tanner growled. "You trying to die?" Luke brushed dust off his jeans, wincing. "No, I'm trying to live." "You can't be serious about tucking that animal home. He's half demon, half dynamite." Luke looked back at Diablo. The horse hadn't moved. Still watching. Still burning. "He's not broken," Luke said. "Just scared. "So are you," Tanner replied. They stood like that for a moment. Two old men in a ring of dust and ghosts. Luke didn't answer. He didn't need to. The decision had already been made. By nightfall, Diablo was loaded into a reinforced trailer, tied but not sedated. Luke had refused the tranquilizers. He wanted the horse to know exactly where he was going. No tricks. No easy starts. The drive to the ranch was long and silent. The radio didn't work, and Luke didn't much care. He spoke once to the darkness behind him. "You and me, we got something to prove." The ranch hadn't changed. Same broken gate. Same wind-worn barn. The stars above it were the only beautiful thing left. Luke backed the trailer in slow, cautious. Diablo didn't thrash, but he didn't settle either. He pawed once, like a warning. Luke opened the trailer door. Didn't reach for the lead. Just waited. After a moment, Diablo stepped out on his own. His hooves hit the dry earth with purpose. He scanned the yard like a general. A low snort rolled from his nostrils. Luke stepped aside. No need to dominate. Not tonight. He guided him to the holding pen, sparse but sturdy. Diablo entered with a toss of his head, but no resistance. Luke latched the gate, then leaned on it. The moonlight touched Diablo's back like silver. For a second, Luke forgot his limp, forgot the pain in his ribs. "Tomorrow we start fresh," he said. Diablo turned his head. Just slightly. Just enough to mean something. In the house, Luke made coffee he wouldn't drink. Sat at the kitchen table where his ex-wife once read the paper. The silence was heavier now. He stared at the table, at a picture still tucked beneath a dusty placemat. Him and a younger version of himself, one hand on a trophy, the other around a smiling woman. The man in the photo had straight shoulders and fire in his eyes. Luke slid the picture away. He didn't need reminders. He had a horse outside that could kill him by morning. Still, when he lay down, he smiled. Morning came early, as it always did on land. Luke rose with a groan, bones clicking into place. He poured oats, filled water buckets, mended the corner of the pen with a hammer that shook in his grip. Diablo stood in the far corner, eyes fixed on him. Not aggressive, just waiting. Luke stepped into the pen without hesitation. The air changed. Every muscle in Diablo's body coiled. Luke didn't approach. He sat down in the dirt near the gate, hat low over his eyes. Time passed. The wind stirred. A hawk cried overhead. Diablo pawed the earth but didn't charge. He circled once, then twice. Luke stayed still, letting the silence speak. "You don't trust nobody," he said softly. "Can't blame you." No response. Just a steady rhythm of breathing. The space between them closed, inch by inch, not physically, but something else. An invisible tether drawing tighter. At dusk, Luke rose and stepped out. He didn't look back. He didn't need to. That night, as crickets chirped and the moon rose fat and yellow over the hills, Diablo lay down in the pen. Not in fear. Not in surrender. Just rest. Luke watched from the porch. Fingers around a cold mug. A pain behind his ribs that wasn't injury. It was hope. Fragile. Foolish. Real. Tomorrow would be harder. Horses like Diablo didn't give an easy. And men like Luke didn't get second chances. Not often. But tonight, the stars blinked in quiet approval. And in the darkness, something began. Not loud. Not grand. Just the first breath of something worth remembering. He whispered into the night, voice almost too low to hear. "We ain't done yet." The wind carried the words to the pen. Diablo flicked an ear. The morning sun bled orange across the Texas horizon, casting long shadows over the Harper Ranch. Luke stood just outside the pen, his hands wrapped around a worn leather lead. Diablo stood on the far side, nostrils flaring, watching with the same fire he'd carried from the auction. They were no closer than before, at least not by inches, but something invisible had shifted between them. There was no charge, no scream, only silence, measured and tense. Luke stepped inside, slow as gravity. He didn't reach out. He didn't speak. He just moved closer, step by step. Diablo snorted and backed a pace, hose grinding into the dry dirt. But he didn't run. Luke stopped 6 feet away, then dropped the lead at his feet. "If you come to me," he said, voice low, "you get to decide." The horse stared, ears pivoting. A buzzard circled far overhead, but the land below was still. For the next hour, they danced without touching. Diablo would inch forward, then shy away. Luke remained patient. When the sun climbed higher, he retreated without drama, left the pen, and shut the gate behind him with quiet dignity. That's how the days went, measured, steady. Trust built not with ropes or commands, but time and restraint. Luke didn't force contact. He offered presence. By the 4th morning, Diablo allowed him to step within arm's reach. On the 6th, Luke brushed the horse's side with the back of his fingers. Soft, brief. By the end of the 2nd week, Diablo wore the halter without a fight. But not everything came so gently. On the 15th morning, while Luke was brushing the animal's coat, Diablo jerked violently. Something had spooked him. Maybe the screech of an old windmill, maybe a distant crack of thunder. Hooves flew. Luke's shoulder caught the brunt, sending him sprawling in the dirt. He didn't yell, didn't curse. He just lay there, blinking up at the sky. When he stood, slowly and with a wince, Diablo stood still. Not scared, not guilty, just distant. Luke gathered himself and walked away without another word. That night, he wrapped his shoulder in silence and stared at the stars from his porch. The pain was sharp, pulsing beneath the skin, but his thoughts ran deeper. "You don't want to hurt me," he murmured to the darkness. "You just don't know how not to." The next morning, Diablo came to the gate without coaxing. The work grew harder. Luke introduced the saddle, at first letting Diablo sniff and paw it. Then he set it on the rail where the horse could examine it. After 3 days, he laid it across Diablo's back. No cinch, no pressure, just presence. When the saddle finally strapped into place, Diablo tensed but didn't explode. Luke exhaled a breath he hadn't known he'd held. He knew this wasn't over. There were still storms buried in that horse. But it was a start. At the feed store in town, the whispers had grown. "You hear about Luke Harper? Took that demon horse home." "Yeah, he's either gone soft ahead or got a death wish. Heard he's trying to ride it next week." Luke ignored them. He didn't need belief. He just needed time. But not everyone in town sneered. Clara Dupree, the store's owner and Luke's neighbor by 10 acres, had watched him with quiet eyes. She was younger than Luke by 10 years, sharp-tongued but soft-spoken when it counted. She offered him liniment for his shoulder and a sack of sweet feed for Diablo. "You're not just fixing a horse," she said one day. "You're fixing yourself." Luke didn't respond right away. He didn't like words that poked too deep, but he met her eyes. "Maybe," he said, "or maybe I'm just trying to finish something right." Back at the ranch, the breakthrough came quietly. Luke had begun working Diablo in the round pen, letting the horse circle, read his body language, learned the rhythm. No ropes, no pain, just direction. Diablo was a quick learner. Too quick. Sometimes. He'd test boundaries, feign obedience, then bolt. But Luke had seen it all before. He knew every trick in the book, and more importantly, he knew when the tricks weren't tricks. They were fear. That afternoon, something shifted. Luke opened the pen, stepped inside, and stood still. Diablo circled once, then twice. On the 3rd pass, he stopped, turned, walked to Luke, head lowered. It wasn't submission. It was choice. Luke raised the lead rope slowly. Diablo didn't flinch. He clipped it on, heart pounding not with fear, but with something ancient, hope. They moved together, slow steps, shoulder to shoulder. Diablo kept pace without resistance. Luke whispered, "You ready?" He didn't expect an answer, but he got one, a low, warm breath against his arm. Later, when the saddle went on and the bridle followed, Luke stood at the stirrup, hand resting lightly on the horn. He didn't mount. Not yet. He just stood there, letting Diablo feel the way of the moment. "You don't have to be perfect," he said. "You just have to trust me." The next day, he climbed into the saddle. The world held its breath. Diablo didn't buck, didn't rear, just trembled. Luke kept his hands light, his voice calm. "Good boy. That's it. Just breathe. They walked in a circle. Then another. Luke dismounted after 5 minutes, rewarded with nothing more than rest and release. That was enough. The ride became daily. Each time, a little longer, a little smoother. Diablo wasn't gentle, but he wasn't trying to kill him either. There was tension, yes, but it was manageable. Still, Luke knew they weren't done. One evening, just as the sun dipped low, he took Diablo to the edge of the ranch. Past a pen, past a barn, down to the creek where wildflowers bloomed and cicadas sang. It was their first ride beyond routine. The moment Diablo's hooves stepped off familiar ground, something inside him snapped. He bolted. Luke held tight, heels down, reins loose but firm. Diablo raced toward the trees, blind with panic. The wind whipped Luke's face. His old bones screamed. But he didn't fight the horse. He guided him. Gradually, slowly, Diablo's speed faltered. Not from exhaustion, but from confusion. Luke wasn't pulling, wasn't yelling, wasn't trying to break him. The horse slowed to a trot, then a walk, then a stop. They stood in the shadows of the oaks, breathless. Luke slid from the saddle, legs shaking. He didn't speak, just pressed a hand to Diablo's neck. The horse didn't move. For the first time, they stood not as rider and beast, but as partners. In the following weeks, Diablo transformed. He no longer flinched at touch. He let Luke brush his mane, check his hooves, tighten the girth without fuss. They rode farther each day, crossing creeks, climbing hills. The horse still spooked now and then, a rabbit darting from the brush, a distant bang. But he no longer bolted. He turned to Luke. He trusted. One morning, Luke saddled him and rode into town. People stared, stopped what they were doing. Tanner was outside the diner, coffee in hand. He nearly dropped it. "Holy hell," he muttered. "He's riding the devil." Luke dismounted near the hitching post, tied Diablo with practiced ease. He looked up at Tanner. "Still think I'm crazy?" Tanner stared at the horse, who stood calm and alert, tail flicking. "I think maybe you're a miracle worker." Luke chuckled. "Nah, just a man with time, patience, and nothing left to lose." Clara stepped out of the store. Her eyes widened, but she didn't say a word. Instead, she walked up, ran a gentle hand down Diablo's flank. He didn't shy. "I'll be damned," she whispered. "You really did it." "No," Luke said. "We did." That evening, as the sunset painted the sky in fire and rose, Luke unsaddled Diablo for the last time that day. He turned him loose in the wide pasture. Diablo didn't run far, just walked in slow circles, then lay down in the grass. Luke sat on the fence rail, watching him. "You're not Diablo anymore," he said. "You're redemption." The horse twitched an ear, stretched out and sighed. Luke's chest ached, not from pain, but from something deeper, something old and buried. Maybe Clara had been right. Maybe this wasn't about fixing a horse. Maybe it was about reclaiming the part of himself he thought he'd lost. Dignity, purpose, faith. As the stars blinked to life overhead, Luke closed his eyes and whispered, "We're not finished yet." The night wind carried the words into the dark, and somewhere in the tall grass and moonlight, a broken legend began to shine again. The air was different that morning, thicker somehow, humming with anticipation. Luke Harper felt it in his chest before he opened his eyes. It clung to the silence, pressed against the windows, slipped through the cracks in the floorboards of the old ranch house. Even the birds seemed to sing more softly, as if nature itself respected what lay ahead. Luke moved slowly, bones creaking beneath his skin. He had slept poorly, haunted by dreams of dust and hooves, of falling and failing, of old voices that never quite faded. But when he stepped outside and saw redemption standing calm near the gate, head high, eyes clear, the weight in Luke's chest lifted just enough to let him breathe. Today wasn't like the other rides. This wasn't practice or progress. This was proof. A rodeo exhibition was being held in Bramble County, a charity event, something light-hearted to raise money for the local orphanage. The town had invited Luke personally, half in disbelief and half in curiosity. No one said it aloud, but the truth was clear. They wanted to see if the legend of the killer horse had really turned into a partner. Clara had called it a chance to rewrite the ending. Luke had stared at her then, unsure, but now, as he brushed Redemption's coat and tightened the cinch, he understood what she meant. It wasn't about crowds or cheers. It was about finishing something he'd started in the dirt of that auction ring. The trailer ride was quiet. Redemption didn't kick or scream. He stood calmly in the dark box as Luke drove the winding road into town. Each mile passed like a chapter turning, the past unraveling behind them. When they arrived, the arena was already alive with noise. Country music humming over the speakers, families seated on bleachers, children waving cotton candy like flags. But when Luke pulled in and lowered the trailer ramp, a hush rolled across the lot. Redemption stepped down with regal grace. People stared. Phones lifted. Whispers spread like brush fire. Is that him? No way. He brought the demon horse here? Tanner approached, hat in hand. For once, his face held no mockery. You really gonna ride him in front of all these folks? He asked. Luke met his gaze without flinching. I didn't come here to prove anything to you. He led Redemption to the side pen, let him stretch, breathe, adjust. The horse's ears flicked, but didn't flatten. His eyes stayed calm, observant. Not once did he rear or bolt. The announcer's voice broke through the buzz of the crowd. And now, folks, we got a surprise exhibition, a local legend back from the brink. Please welcome Luke Harper and Redemption. The name echoed over the loudspeakers. A ripple moved through the audience. Some clapped. Some leaned forward, expectant. Others looked skeptical, arms folded, waiting for the failure. Luke mounted up. For a moment, he just sat there, feeling the leather beneath him, the warmth of the animal below. Then he nudged Redemption forward with a soft squeeze of his calves. They moved into the arena. Two shadows joined in rhythm. Luke kept it simple. No stunts, no posturing. He guided Redemption through figure eights, sharp stops, smooth reversals. The horse responded to every signal, light as thought, fluid as breath. It was more than obedience. It was understanding. Then came the moment of silence. Luke halted Redemption in the center of the ring. He dismounted, dropped the reins, and stepped away. The crowd held its breath. Redemption stood still. Luke turned his back to him, walked 10 paces. Redemption didn't move. Then, with only a soft whistle, Luke signaled. The horse came to him, calm, certain, unforced. The stands erupted. Luke didn't bow, didn't raise a fist in victory. He simply rested his hand on the horse's shoulder and whispered, "That'll do." Later, as the sun began to dip behind the fairground trees and the crowds trickled away, Tanner found Luke by the trailer. "Never thought I'd say this," he began, scratching his neck. "But that was something else." Luke offered a dry smile. "You thought he'd buck me clean into the stands." "I did," Tanner admitted, "but I was wrong." Luke shrugged. "You weren't the only one." Clara appeared then, a bag of kettle corn in one hand, a glint in her eyes. "I told you," she said, voice soft and sure. "People love a second chance." Redemption nickered, leaning his head over the trailer door toward her. She laughed, reached out, and rubbed his muzzle. "I think he does too." Back at the ranch that night, everything was quiet again. Stars blinked above the pasture. The wind carried the scent of hay and dust, and Redemption stood in the field unbound. Luke sat on the porch steps, boots muddy, heart full. But still, there was something unsettled, a thread unpulled. He reached into the pocket of his worn jacket and pulled out an old, yellowed photograph. His son, 12 years old, sitting atop a bay mare, laughing, eyes squinting against the sun. That mare had thrown him, snapped his neck. A freak accident, they called it. Luke hadn't touched a horse since, until Redemption. He stared at the photo a long time, then folded it, tucked it back into the dark. "I'm sorry," he whispered to the night. "I was angry for too long." The next morning, Luke woke before the sun. He saddled Redemption quietly, guided him down the long fence line and beyond, into the valley where the old path twisted through wild oak and mesquite. They rode in silence, dew glistening on every blade of grass. Luke didn't know exactly where he was going, only that the journey mattered, They crossed creeks, scaled rocky slopes. Hours passed. Finally, they came to a ridge that overlooked a wide, open stretch of prairie. The wind was stronger here, rushing up from the lowlands, pushing against him like memory. Luke dismounted and let redemption graze. He walked to the edge of the ridge and sat in the dirt. In that moment, everything returned, his son's laughter, the weight of his wife's silence, the years lost in bitterness. But they no longer crushed him. They simply existed, part of him, part of the journey. Redemption walked to him then, nudged his shoulder with a soft snort. Luke smiled. "Yeah," he said, "I think he would have liked you." The ride back was easier. Light filled the path. The world seemed wider. In town, word spread fast. Luke and Redemption became more than a story. They became a symbol, not of taming the wild, but of healing the broken. He didn't enter competitions, didn't sell the horse, didn't chase attention. He just lived. He helped troubled teens at the ranch, let them work with Redemption, taught them patience, taught them grace. Some of them were angry, some quiet, some so fragile they barely spoke. But each of them found something in the horse they hadn't found anywhere else. A mirror, a challenge, a second chance, and Redemption gave it freely. One stormy night, a young boy named Elijah stood frozen at the gate, afraid to step near the pen. The wind howled. Rain threatened. Luke stood beside him, silent. Elijah whispered, "What if he doesn't want me?" Luke crouched, his voice firm. "He don't care what you were. He only sees what you could be." Elijah walked forward. Redemption met him halfway. Years passed. The ranch grew not in size but in soul. Redemption aged, slower now but steady. His coat grayed around the muzzle. His steps lost some fire, but not the spirit. Luke aged too. Wrinkles deepened. Joints stiffened. But his heart beat steadier than ever. One autumn morning, he found Redemption lying in the pasture, breathing slow. He sat beside him for hours. Didn't cry. Didn't speak much. Just rested a hand on the broad, warm flank. When the time came, the sun was setting. Redemption exhaled once, long, slow, and then he was still. Luke buried him beneath the old oak, the one near the fence line. He carved no stone, left no plaque, only a rope halter draped over the lowest branch. Clara came by that evening, found Luke on the porch, cup of coffee cold in his hand. "I'm sorry," she said. He looked at her, tired but peaceful. "He saved me," he murmured. They sat in silence. Far off, coyotes sang. Wind swept across the field. The stars blinked awake, unbothered by grief. Luke finally stood, stretched. "Come on," he said. "I want to show you something." He led her to the barn, opened the side stall. Inside stood a young colt, dark as night, eyes bright with fire. Clara raised an eyebrow. "Another rescue?" Luke smiled, soft and certain. "No," he said, "a beginning." And as the night embraced the ranch once more, the wind carried something new. Neither sorrow nor triumph, but the soft echo of promise. The story wasn't over. It had just become legend. The morning mist curled like memory across the hills, delicate tendrils clinging to the dew-wet fence posts and whispering through the trees. The world hadn't quite woken yet, and neither had Luke Harper. He stood alone in the stillness of the pasture, one hand resting on the gate, the other holding the worn brim of his hat against his chest. Silence held everything. The breath of the land, the ache of remembrance, the quiet, unyielding promise of what came next. Redemption was gone. It had been 2 seasons since Luke had laid him to rest under the old oak. The rope halter still swayed gently from the low branch, its fibers softened by time and weather. Luke hadn't touched it, not out of grief, but reverence. Some things weren't meant to be moved. They were meant to remain, as markers, as echoes. Life didn't pause with the passing of a legend. The ranch still breathed, still grew. The kids came and went, each carrying fragments of their own brokenness. And Luke met them piece by piece, with steady hands and patient eyes. But something had shifted in him. Not a hollowness, not sorrow, just a deeper silence, as if his heart now lived half in this world and half in the one Redemption had left behind. Claire knew not to ask too much. She helped where she could, bringing food, managing volunteers, keeping the chaos of logistics off Luke's shoulders. But even she could feel the stillness in him, like he was listening to something the rest of them couldn't hear. And then the letter came. It arrived on a Tuesday morning, tucked into a stack of mail Luke rarely opened. He almost threw it out with the feed store ads and vet notices. But the handwriting stopped him. Strong, familiar, almost defiant. He opened it slowly. The letter was short. Luke, if you're reading this, I'm dead. Don't mourn me. I had my run. But I left something behind you need to see. Go to the White Bluff Sanctuary. Ask for Willa. It's time you understood the whole story. J.D. J.D. Fletcher. A name Luke hadn't spoken in over 20 years. A trainer. A mentor. A man wrapped in mystery and madness and brilliance. J.D. had been the first to teach Luke the language of horses. Not just the reins and pressure, but the quiet communication that passed through breath and stillness. He had vanished from the rodeo circuit after a scandal Luke never fully understood. Rumors swirled, abuse, theft, betrayal. But J.D. never defended himself. He just disappeared. And now, suddenly, J.D. had reached across the grave. Luke folded the letter slowly, heart hammering in his chest. There was no decision to make. He saddled the young colt, the one born the spring after Redemption died, and rode out before noon. White Bluff Sanctuary lay 3 counties over, nestled between rugged cliffs and sprawling plains. It wasn't marked on any tourist maps. You had to know it was there. Luke hadn't been in decades, not since he and J.D. had trained Mustangs together in that Canyon Street place. The ride up the gravel road stirred old ghosts. Trees he remembered as saplings now towered overhead. Fences once white now leaned with age. But the stillness was the same. That sacred hush horses always brought with them. A woman stood at the gate. Lean, silver-haired, arms crossed with an air of permanent challenge. "You must be Luke," she said without preamble. He nodded. "You're Willa?" "I am." "Come on then. We've been waiting on you." She turned and strode toward the barn without another word. Luke followed, unsure whether to feel welcome or judged. Inside the barn it smelled of hay, old wood, and something fainter, cedar oil maybe. Dozens of horses stood calmly in their stalls. Some turned their heads as he passed. One whinnied low. Willa stopped before a stall at the far end. Inside stood a mare, tall, lean, dark as midnight. Luke's breath caught. That's not. "No," Willa said. "I's never leaving the horse. But she's his blood." Luke took a slow step forward, watching the mare carefully. She didn't flinch, just blinked, calm and curious. "Redemption at offspring?" he asked. "One. Born in secret. J.D. kept her quiet for a reason." Luke turned toward her. "Why?" Willa sighed, hand brushing the stall rail, like she was touching memory. "Because Redemption wasn't bred. He was stolen." The words hit like a hoof to the chest. "What do you mean?" "He wasn't a wild rogue stallion like they claimed. He was trained. Belonged to a woman named Maria Vexler. She was building a new bloodline, smarter, calmer, stronger. J.D. was helping her. But someone wanted him out of the picture. There was a dispute over ownership. Vexler died in a fire the same year Redemption vanished. Luke swallowed, throat dry. And J.D. took him? Rescued him. Hid him. Let the world think he was dangerous. It was safer that way. Luke's thoughts swirled. Why me? Why did he send Redemption to that auction, knowing he'd be branded a killer? Willa finally looked at him. Her eyes were piercing, sharp as truth. Because you were the only one who would listen, who could see past the scars. J.D. knew you'd find the truth, even if you didn't know it yet. Luke leaned against the stall, the weight of everything settling in his bones. He used me. No, Willa said softly. He trusted you. The mare inside the stall stepped forward then, touching her muzzle to Luke's shoulder. Her breath was warm. Her eyes were steady. She's yours if you want her, Willa said. Luke didn't answer. He didn't need to. The mare had already decided. He stayed at White Bluff for a week, learning her language, understanding the new rhythm. She was different from Redemption, not as wild, but not soft either. She challenged him in silence, forced him to earn every step. He named her Ember, not because she burned, but because she glowed quietly with a heat that never died. When they returned to the ranch, the kids gathered by the fence, wide-eyed and buzzing. Is that his daughter? She looks like him. Can she do the things he did? Luke didn't answer their questions. He just opened the gate and let Ember walk in on her own. She took her time, sniffed the ground, trotted to the far end of the field, then turned and galloped back, strong and sure. The kids cheered. Elijah, now 16 and taller than Luke, leaned against a post and smiled. She's got fire. Luke nodded. So do you? Over the months, Ember settled in, but she wasn't meant to stay hidden. There was something unfinished in her, a thread left untied. Clara noticed first. She needs her own story, she said one evening, as they watched Ember circle the pasture beneath the moonlight. Luke nodded slowly. Maybe we both do. So he made a choice, not for glory, not for revenge, but to rewrite a legacy. He entered the Cross Trails Invitational, a high-stakes event known not for competition, but for honoring harmony between horse and rider. There were no buckles, no cash prizes, just one test, a complex course of trust, timing, and silent cues. The audience judged nothing. The horse judged everything. Ember was ready. The day of the event, Luke dressed in simple denim and a clean button-down shirt. No flash, no fanfare, just a man and a mare stepping into their moment. As they entered the arena, the world narrowed. Luke didn't speak. Ember didn't hesitate. They moved like twin flames, every turn tight, every pause deliberate. She responded to shifts in his weight, to breaths, to invisible cues born of months of quiet work. The crowd didn't cheer. They just watched, spellbound. Halfway through the course, Ember stopped at the bridge, a narrow platform hovering above shallow water. She pawed once, twice. Luke waited. No pressure, no fear, only presence. Then she stepped forward. One hoof, then another. By the time they reached the other side, the silence broke. A quiet ripple of applause. Respect. Awe. Not for mastery, but for partnership. After the ride, as they stood under the shade of the grandstand, a woman approached. Tall, dark-haired, her eyes sharp with recognition. "You're Harper, right?" she asked. "I am. I was Maria Vexler's niece. I came here today because someone told me a Harper would ride her legacy." Luke looked at Ember, then back at the woman. "She rides herself," he said. The woman smiled. Maria would have liked that. The ranch returned to rhythm in the days that followed. But something had shifted, like a gate had opened and the wind now blew freer. Luke kept Ember close, but not caged. He let others ride her, let her teach the way redemption had taught, without words, without force, just presence. And slowly, the pain that had once shadowed Luke's every step faded into something softer. Not gone, but gentle, like the memory of a song, not the echo of a scream. On the anniversary of Redemption's death, Luke stood beneath the oak tree. Elijah joined him. Clara, too. Even Willa had made the trip. They didn't say much. They didn't have to. Luke reached up and touched the halter, then looked at the sky. And for the first time, he felt no weight in his chest, only wind and space. That night, as the stars bloomed over the ranch and the horses slept in quiet peace, Luke Harper sat on his porch with Ember beside him. The fire in her eyes reflected the embers in his soul. He smiled, slow and sure. The story wasn't over, but the burden was, and that was enough.